Okay, I think this is working. I think we're live. I have never done this before, but I got some pretty sweet lighting, huh? My name is Mick Sullivan, and I am the host and creator of The Past and the Curious, which is a podcast, a history podcast for families and children. I'm going to look over here and make sure that it's working. There's my face. Looks like it's working. Okay, good. So I have a podcast, The Past and the Curious. It's a lot of fun. I've got 53 episodes or so. And I create it here in Louisville, Kentucky. And I also work at the Fraser History Museum. And so I should mention, I don't have a Facebook account, but this is actually streaming on the Fraser Museum's Facebook account. Because they happen to, we actually opened an exhibit called Cool Kentucky just this past year. The meat shower definitely fits into that, right? So, it's a celebration. I guess I should have started off by saying Happy Meat Shower Day to everyone! This is the second annual Kentucky Meatshower celebration, so I'm glad that you have chosen to join us. It looks like we're already getting some... Max, Max, what's up from episode 51? Great, we're already getting some interaction, so yeah, say hi. Tell me what you think. So let me just give you a quick run of show so you know what's going to happen. It's going to be, 25 minutes long, something like that. Whatever. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Kentucky Meatshower, and then I'm going to read the book, The Kentucky Meatshower. And then, if anybody is interested and wants to stick around, I have been working on another book that's a very different book, and I have most of it done. I'll read a chapter of it. So I think at that time I'm going to cut the Fraser Facebook live feed because that doesn't fit. But so if you are watching the Fraser Facebook live stream and you want to hear the story, then hop on over to the YouTube channel. You can find that link on all the social medias, and also you can just search The Past and the Curious, Mick Sullivan, or Mick Sullivan, The Past and the Curious. So I hope everyone out there had a good meat shower day. And I also hope that hope you're listening to the podcast already. If you're not, please do. Would love it. Shout out to all the Kids Listen fans out there, or Kids Listen friends. I mean, I see Durante and Phoebe and fam. What's up, y'all? Okay, so the backstory on the meat shower. This is very, very important for you to know the whole story. I found out about this story probably 10 years ago because one of my very good friends, who actually lives across the street from me, he was born on March 3rd. It's his birthday. I also have a really close coworker, Megan, whose birthday is today as well. So happy birthday, Megan. But John, as we all do, you kind of search things that happen on your birthday, right? I know the people who were born on my birthday. I share a birthday with Tom Hanks. I bet a lot of you know who you share a birthday with. Or my son, he was born on November 5th, and that is Guy Fawkes Day. So it's really easy. You could say, remember the 5th of November, right? So you know what happens on your birthday. So anyway, John was doing some research and, just looking around to see what happened on his birthday. And he found out about the Kentucky Meatshower. This was probably 12 years ago, actually. And it captured my imagination. And, it's you can read about it online. There's always, this time of year, there's always features on websites. And there's also, there's typically it's on TV shows. It's usually a quick little nugget of, which is a gross thing to say about the meat shower, but it's a nugget of interest. Actually Ozzy Osbourne featured it on his show as well. So that piqued my interest, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. I would kind of learn about it whenever it crossed my mind again, and kind of piece together the story. And it went on and on and on like that. And I discovered more and more, and was really excited to find out that there is a specimen. There is actually a specimen. I posted a picture of me with the specimen on some social media channels. But there is one remaining specimen, and it is at Transylvania University, which is a school. It's a college in Lexington, Kentucky, which is not far from where I am. It's about an hour and a half from Louisville. But it was the first college in the state of Kentucky, or the first medical college. I don't want to get that wrong. I know it was the first medical school. And so they had all of these weird things that they had collected. There's like a gigantic hairball, bezoar, which people would treat poison with, and all that sort of stuff. And they never like replaced their stuff because they closed their medical school. And so a lot of it just kind of got locked up. Just like they put it in a closet and unlocked the door. And so I was lucky enough to get introduced to a guy who teaches there. He's actually in the art department. His name's Kurt Godey. And he's a super fantastic guy. And if you ever see somebody on TV talking about the Meatshower, it's probably Kurt. And he's the guy that has been kind of holding the story up and like carrying the flame forever. And so I called him up and we talked about it and had like just a invigorating conversation. And I had been thinking about a story, so I started to put it down. Put it snowballed from there. It was a great experience. And then I got hooked up with a friend of mine named Shay Goodlett, who was an incredible illustrator, and he had some really cool ideas on how to illustrate the book. So anyway, this one little specimen, we decided to make that specimen the narrator of the story. So this only lonely little chunk of meat is the narrator of our story. And just like we don't know what happened, he doesn't either, because that's one of the most amazing things to me about the Kentucky Meatshower is, and I got this from talking to that fellow Kurt at Transylvania. Science has been around. I mean, science has done amazing things, and we figured out all sorts of mysteries. But the Kentucky Meatshower mystery hasn't really been solved, and maybe that's because people don't want a definite answer. Whatever the case is, it's amazing that we don't have an agreement. We don't have a definite answer, because it's one of the few things that we don't know. It's inexplicable, and we can think about it, and we can wonder about it, and we can think, why? Like, what a strange occurrence, right? And so just like you and I don't know the answer to it, the chunk of meat, who is a real chunk of meat, who lives in a jar at Transylvania University, he wants to know the answer too. So he's the narrator of the story. I'm going to read you the story in just one moment. But before I do that, I want to share with you, just to prove, if you don't know about the Kentucky Meatshower, just to prove that it is very true, these are actual newspaper articles that I've printed off from 1876 and 45th anniversary of the Kentucky Meatshower. So, yeah! Now, this first one, I'm going to read you the whole story because it's short. This is from the New York Times. The New York Times, March 9th. The Bath County News of the date says, on last Friday, a shower of meat fell near the house of Alan Crouch, who lives some 2 or 3 miles from the Olympian Springs in the southern portion of the county, covering a strip of ground about 100 yards in length and 50 feet wide. So, about a football field's, worth of space. Oh, by the way, back to the script. Miss Crouch was out in the yard at the time, engaged in making soap, when meat, which looked like beef, began to fall around her. The sky was perfectly clear at the time, and she said it fell like large snowflakes. The pieces, as general thing, not being much larger. I think the implication is not much larger than snowflakes. Again, that's an editorial. One piece fell near her, which was 3 or 4 inches square. That's a big chunk of meat. Mr. Harrison Gill, whose veracity is unquestionable, that means he's a very honest man, and from whom we obtained the above facts, hearing of the occurrence, visited the locality the next day, and says he saw particles of meat sticking to fences and scattered over the ground. When the meat, when it first fell, appeared to be perfectly fresh. The correspondent for the Louisville Commercial, which is a newspaper, writing from Mount Sterling, corroborates the above, and says the pieces of flesh were of various sizes and shapes, some of them being 2 inches square. 2 gentlemen, who tasted the meat, expressed the opinion that it was either mutton or venison. So yes, somebody ate the meat. Now, I'm not going to read you this one because this is really, really long. This is from the New York Herald. So both of these were covered by newspapers in New York. I'm going to read you the headlines because headlines from the 19th century are often hilarious and very over the top. But I do also want to point out that in this, he actually interviews Mrs. Crouch, and also interviews another man who tasted the meat, whose name was Benjamin, and we pay homage to him in the book, that he ate it and he swore that it was bear. He had been someone out west, and he had fought and killed a bear and eaten a bear, and he said it was bear meat. Anyway, here's the headline. The Carnal Reign. Careful investigation of Kentucky. Marvel by a correspondent. The locality visited. Statements from eyewitnesses of phenomenon. Appearance and taste of supernatural flesh. So, that's some good stuff right there. Okay. Well, I think it's time to read the book. Oh, Mason! Hey, good to see you, Mason. That's excellent to see you. Somebody just saw us today. Hey, Mike! What's up, Mike Moraz? Great to see you. All right. Great. Thank you all for tuning in. Okay, so let's get started with the book. This is The Kentucky Meatshower, published by Early Works Press in 2018, and illustrated by my friend Shay Goodlett. So I'm going to read a page, and then I'll hold the page up so you can see the illustrations, because they're really fantastic, and I don't want you to miss them. So the full title of this book is The Past and the Curious presents The Meatshower, the mostly true tale of an odd and somewhat edible occurrence. Okay, and I'm going to read the dedication page to my sons. To Owen and Ben, always be curious and kind, and laugh a lot. But that goes for everyone, really. Okay, so we open. I'm going to try to fight that glare. I'm going to lean down. So we open a library shelf, and you see right there on that dusty shelf. It's just a fact. Sometimes strange things happen. And you're most certainly going to think this story is strange, but it's a tale as true as the leaves and the trees. Why, it's as real as this very jar on this very shelf, the same one that I call home. That's our meat man. Maybe you've heard about that famous tsunami of Sticky, the Great Molasses Disaster, as it's known. That was unusual, but easy to explain. A giant storage tank exploded and sent a tidal wave of gooey brown sweetness slowly creeping through the streets of Boston. Or, there was the time that a giant flock of birds just plumb fell right out of the sky with nothing more than a thunder of thuds on the ground. Some folks call that one the Louisiana blackbird tragedy. And believe it or not, I've heard something similar has happened to frogs. But if you're really looking for something strange, I'll tell you. There's nothing quite like what happened in that little town of Olympia Springs one March day in 1876. This is the illustration of the Great Molasses Disaster. It's an homage to a very famous Japanese woodblock print, but instead of being a giant tidal wave, it is a wave of molasses over Boston. That's a very notable building in Boston. Here's the other illustration with the bird bombs. Not sure. Here's our little landscape of Olympia Springs, and you see the Meatshower man sitting here with a pipe, looking like Mark Twain, about to spin a yarn. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. But that's the reason I'm here, so I'm going to tell you anyway. Mrs. Crouch was gathering supplies to make a batch of soap. It was a hot, smelly job, so she typically worked in the yard, and the weather seemed perfect for her task. Making soap was a very common thing. You had to make your own soap, and it was a messy, pretty gross job. Be grateful that we don't have to do it. This is one of the 2-page spreads. So this is a great spread of Mrs. Crouch on her front porch stoop. Before she opened the door, she heard a sound from the roof above her. At first, she thought it was a spring shower, but it didn't sound quite like the rain she knew. It fell at odd times. Not the steady, gentle pity-pat of a shower's first raindrops. It was a heavy, flat sound, a soft thunk against her old tin roof. Out the window, she saw nothing unusual. But then she heard a few more thunks, I'm sorry. She heard a few more thunks. This is one of my favorite pictures right here. It smacked her face with a sloppy slap and slid, slimy and slow, down the soft skin on the side of her face. She caught her breath and then broke the silence with a shriek. Her husband, the kindly Mr. Crouch. When I screamed, my banjo started making noise. Her husband, kindly Mr. Crouch, came running from the barn as she screamed, "I got hit in the face with a piece of meat!" As matter of fact as someone can be in such a peculiar situation, her dear husband calmly replied with a smile, "I know! There's meat falling all over the place! It's a meat shower!" "A meat shower?" she screamed. "There's no such thing! Meat doesn't fall from the sky!" Here's another big spread. Everyone's on the porch. Now, that is most generally true. Meat does not normally fall from the sky. But that day, Mrs. Crouch was wrong. On the 3rd of March in 1876, in the little town of Olympia Springs, meat did fall from the sky. Oh, I hope the feed isn't like pausing. It seems kind of stoppy. I'm just going to press on. Before long, the neighbors gathered on the Crouch's porch, confused and excited. A few carried umbrellas. Someone was toting a shovel, and another had a rake. Told you we'd have Ben who eats the meat. Ben was the last to arrive, excited, hungry, and ready to make the best of the shower. Pointing with pride to the pail in his hand, he exclaimed, "Look, it's almost full of this meat rain. Guess what's for dinner tonight?" This idea horrified Mrs. Crouch. "Ben, I think that's a terrible idea. You shouldn't eat meat that fell out of the sky. You don't even know what it is or where it came from. What if it makes you sick?" "Please," she begged, "empty the pail." She was probably right, but Ben saved a little, just in case it was delicious. Now, like all normal showers, this strange meat shower eventually came to an end. Now, perplexed by the strange chunks scattered about, the people of Olympia Springs set about to solve the mystery, but they would not be alone. The next morning, this is a great picture. Oh, there's also a nice Easter egg in this picture. Back there you see Heine Brothers Coffee. The next morning, newspapers from the Carolinas to California ran the story. No one had ever heard of such a bizarre happening. It was the talk of the nation, and before long the place... Everyone was hungry for an explanation to the mysterious meat from the sky. Specimens were packed up and sent to labs all over the country, while in Olympia Springs, people guessed and gossiped and waited for an answer. One scientist said it was horse meat. I guess he just thought a horse up and exploded, shooting meat all over the place. Can you imagine? Not likely if you ask me. And besides, no one in town reported missing any horses. This was like one of the first images that we came up with. And I think Shay knocked it out of that park. Another scientist speculated that the meat shower was the product of a kettle of vultures, which is the name for a flock of vultures who are in flight. In this hypothesis, a big group of those birds had just feasted on a giant meal, and then, when they started to fly, one of them realized that maybe it had eaten too much. If he was going to stay in the air, he had to, get rid of some of that meat. And here's the thing about vultures. If one of them barfs, they all barf. it's a real thing. That's my favorite. That's my favorite spread in the whole book. Now, in the end, Mrs. Crouch and the townspeople never heard an explanation that satisfied them. While the scientific specimens disappeared, and most of them were thrown away, or eaten by Ben, the town wandered, waited, and watched the skies, hoping another meat shower would leave better evidence. After a while, life went back to normal. The meat shower remained a point of pride in Olympia Springs, Kentucky. But people everywhere else soon forgot about it. Here's. But not me. I can't think of anything else. Of course, today, Mr. and Mrs. Crouch, Hungry Ben, and all the curious townfolk are a distant memory. But I'm still here. I remember hitting the ground, surrounded by all the others. But I don't have the foggiest memory of what happened before that. All I can do is wonder as I stew in a dusty old museum shelf. Once, I was in newspapers from Carolina to California, but to the few who even notice me today, I'm little more than a curiosity. They squint their eyes and wrinkle their noses before they move on. This is the last scene. You can see he's still trying to piece together the mystery. He's connecting the dots. It's kind of a play on, I guess, A Beautiful Mind, which is a movie. Maybe meat will never fall from the sky again. But I still pray someone curious and clever is struck by that distant, fateful March day and is hungry to solve my mystery. Where there is mystery, there is hope. And as you've clearly seen, anything can happen. So do me a favor and check the weather for tomorrow. I wonder if it's going to rain. The end. So that is the Kentucky Meatshower. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to that. If you'd like to get a copy, you can get it Early Works Press. You can find it at thepastandthecurious.com. More importantly, I invite you, if you don't already, to tune in, press play on the podcast, The Past and the Curious. It's a lot of fun for me to produce. It's free, it's awesome, that's great. And I'm also excited to see so many of my kids listen, friends. There are a ton of really great kids podcasts. I happen to be the co-chair this year, but there is a content for kids to enjoy and learn from, and I think like a lot of the shows, like in addition, one of my big guiding principle parents can enjoy together. So I think you'll find all sorts of stuff like that on Kids Listen. So at this point, I'm going to say thank you to the Facebook people, if there's anybody watching on that feed. I'm going to turn that off in just a minute. So if you are one of those and you would like to continue, you can go to YouTube and find it there. The Past and the Curious, Mick, Sullivan. And if anyone else on the YouTube feed is done and you've had enough of me, then yeah, thank you. That's great. I'm so glad you're here to celebrate the meat shower with me. Anyone who would like to stick around, as I said, I'm going to read a story that I have finished for a new book. I have to say how fortunate I am. Oh, let me kill that Facebook feed. Bye, Facebook people. All right. Okay, now that it's just us. Kidding. So I have to say how fortunate I was to get this book published. Someone believed in it and published it, and I feel very fortunate for that. I have been writing another book that's more of a chapter book, individual chapters, and I'm in the process where I'm trying to get somebody to represent and then find a publisher. And that's a really difficult process. And I've been, I haven't had any luck. But it's okay because I've got like 14 really fun stories that I'm really excited about. And all of them, if you know me, I like to put some underwear in some stories, right? Well, all of them are underwear stories. They are all true stories from history that have to do with underwear. So, here we go. So, let me preface this. If you listened to the most recent episode, you heard about Sophie Blanchard. This story is about Sophie Blanchard's husband, and I made a quick allusion in the story, in the episode, to his underwear mishap. This is that story. So you'll recognize some of it. Some of it will be, most of it will be brand new. Okay, let's do this. A duck, a rooster, and a sheep in the basket of a hot air balloon. This is not a joke, but a jet-setting petting zoo. One that really flew. In 1783, floating farm animals to the clouds was how the Montgolfier brothers of France convinced the king that their new invention was safe. King Louis had been worried about putting an actual human in the new hot air balloon, and he requested some test flights. Oh, great. Oh, hi, LP. Thanks for helping out on Facebook. King Louis, having been worried about putting an actual human in the new hot air balloon, requested some test flights with a tethered herd. No animals were harmed in the making of this story, thankfully, so Louis gave the ballooning brothers his blessing. And this set the stage for France to lead Europe in flight for decades. Truthfully, it's a wonder that the flying flock was safe by the standards of today. It was essentially made out of wallpaper, which is a really bad match for the open flame needed to lift it. One errant ember could have turned the beautiful balloon into a flaming fireball, unfazed themselves. It's a wonder that they lived long lives without ever hitting the ground. Someone who would eventually hit the ground was another French aeronaut named Jean-Pierre Blanchard. Long before Blanchard came crashing down to Earth, he was testing the limits of flight in a unique balloon of his own. While the Montgolfier brothers were flying their hot air balloon, Blanchard chose a newly discovered gas, hydrogen, to lift his. Hydrogen is the lightest element on the periodic table, which makes it lighter than air. And Blanchard realized if the gas were captured in a sack, like say a balloon, then it would float. Tie a basket to the balloon, hop in, and before you can say dirigible, you're on your way to the clouds. One note, before this was commonly known as hydrogen, inflammable air. And contrary to your instincts, inflammable means the same. In fact, just ask the captain of the Hindenburg blimp, who would learn this lesson in 1927. Now, Jean-Pierre didn't use any flames, though. He had a crazier idea. Once he got his big balloon off the ground, he thought he would be able to glide through the air like a boat on a lake. On this hunch, he made a hand-crank propeller and big silk air paddles. Kind of like wings on sticks. Now, if the story of human creativity has taught us anything, it's that some ideas are good and some are not so good. Those air paddles were not a very good idea, but anything is worth a shot. On the bright side, his balloon really floated. It floated so well that a man named John Jeffries became a financier. Being an aeronautic pioneer costs a lot of money, you see. There were the cost of materials and upkeep of a balloon, buying hydrogen, traveling to launch sites, and more. And Jeffries was excited and interested by the possibilities of flight, so he helped Blanchard pay for all of this. But, like the basket hanging from the bottom of Blanchard's balloon, there were strings attached. Jeffries was an American doctor who remained loyal to the King of England during the American Revolution, and the revolting Americans didn't take too kindly to the Loyalists at the time, so Jeffries left for Europe. He carried a curious passion for understanding how the weather worked, and saw the balloon as a way to learn more. As he figured it, his money should earn him a seat on the balloon with Jean-Pierre. But it wasn't just any seat on any flight that he had his heart set on. Jean-Pierre was planning to make history by crossing the English Channel, and John wanted to be along for that ride. If successful, the flight would be the very first overseas international balloon crossing. Jeffries envisioned being memorialized in history books for the groundbreaking feat, and in a way, he was right. But he would probably be embarrassed to know that his underwear played a huge role. Jean-Pierre begrudgingly agreed, and they'd fly from England to France over the body of salty water that separates the two countries. If they were unsuccessful, they'd wind up with wet undies, best case, or as fish food, worst case. The distance between Dover, England, and Calais, France is only about 20 miles, but it was still a wildly dangerous thing to attempt. The men would find themselves at the mercy of the wind. This meant that it would take hours to travel. They'd also have to be very careful about what they brought with them, because the balloon could only carry so much baggage. But a dirigible descending somewhere over the English Channel was another matter entirely. Now, if we could go back in time and check Jean-Pierre's report card from school, it would probably say, Jean-Pierre is very smart and gifted in engineering, but he does not play well with others. Sure, he agreed to let Jeffries join the flight, but it was probably just to shut him up. In reality, he had no intention of sharing a single ounce of foreign flight fame and glory. The finicky Frenchman tried nearly every dirty trick he could think of to keep John Jeffries sulking on the ground and not by his side in the basket. At the launch site in Dover, the overly dramatic Jean-Pierre ran screaming to his room, something about never learning how to share. Like a nice, mature adult, he locked himself in his room and refused to come out. He hoped John would just give up and go home. The exiled American would not give up easily, though, so Blanchard lost that battle of wills, and soon the men found themselves together in the basket of the balloon. When finally untied, the moment was rather uneventful. Filled with the men, cargo, tools, and such, the balloon never left the earth. The hydrogen-filled sack above their heads was no match for the full basket at their feet. This was not a good sign for the crossing of the English Channel and put them at very high risk for becoming fish food. The overweight basket surprised John, though. He had double-checked all of the calculations and was certain that it should have lifted the load. But there was no denying it now. The basket was too heavy. Thanks for sticking around, by the way. All right. The basket was too heavy. At least that's the way the conniving Jean-Pierre wanted it to seem. He put on an Oscar-winning performance, dripping with feigned sorrow and fake remorse. He informed John that as much as he hated it, it would appear that the balloon could only carry one man, and since he was the only actual balloon pilot, and since it was such a dangerous endeavor, well, perhaps it would be best if John just let him go ahead on his own. By now, Jeffries might have imagined the frustrating and sneaky Jean-Pierre going down alone into the unforgiving ocean with a bit of glee. He could have easily hopped out and waved a final goodbye, but the idea of Jean-Pierre instead going down in history, alone mind you, was enough for him to stay in the basket. Of course, when Jeffries considers Jean-Pierre's behavior so far, the weight problem did continue to be suspicious, and then his eye caught a glimpse of something curious. An unfamiliar leather belt peeked out of the break in Jean-Pierre's jacket. John demanded to know what was under his clothes. Little did he know that he would get more than an eyeful of that soon enough. At this demand, Jean-Pierre stammered and protested, but he knew it was no use. He pulled back his jacket to reveal a fanny pack full of lead. This was the real reason the balloon was not lifting off. The aeronaut was persistent, if nothing else. There were no other tricks that Blanchard had up his sleeves, and he'd have to toss the lead and share the basket. The two men put their disagreements behind them and joined their fates, finally setting sail to the skies. In the balloon with the men was a bag full of letters being sent to France. The ineffective silk air paddles, some biscuits, some brandy, and a whole host of scientific equipment. Expecting to make history and wanting to look good while doing it, the two men were dressed in some of their finest clothes. As they left the cliffs of Dover behind and below, everything seemed to be going well enough. The balloon floated like a big purple sun in the gray sky, and the idea of fish food was the farthest thing from either man's mind. Then things changed quickly. Somewhere out there, over the waves of the Channel, before the coast of France had come into sight, both men agreed that they were slowly getting closer to the water. And that's the wrong direction to be going. The descent was not dramatic at first, so there was no real need to panic. Obviously, they had brought a lot with them, and if they needed to lighten the weight of the basket, there were certainly a few things that they could afford to toss over. It would be a relatively short journey. They could certainly live without the brandy and the bread. If tossed overboard, perhaps those few pounds would get the balloon moving back upward. It was worth a shot. The goods splashed into the ocean, and the men waited to see if it would do the trick. It did not. A tiny twinge of panic, like a single bubble in a glass of soda, raced through their bodies. They looked over to see the salty water a little bit closer than it had been before. And without hesitation, the silken air paddles and propeller were also tossed into the froth. When the pair peered over the side again, the water was even closer still. Several more bubbles of panic raced up their bodies. The telescope, the compass, and assortment of scientific tools, they were expensive, but they would have been no use to a scientist who was sleeping in Davy Jones' locker. With a nervous gulp and a Hail Mary prayer, these two were tossed out of the basket. The valuable instrument sank to the bottom of the English Channel. Still, no luck. The balloon sank closer, nearing the water. After tossing the bag of mail, there was nothing left to throw out. Meanwhile, the bottom of the balloon's basket was perilously close to being swallowed by the sea. Those fizzy bubbles of panic in their body were now overflowing like a bottle of soda hurled across the room. By now, the terrified twosome were all that remained in the basket of the balloon. Neither were willing to give in to a watery fate, and they looked at each other, hoping against hope for salvation. It was obvious that there was too much weight, but there was nothing left to jettison. They were at an impasse. Then it clicked. Pee! Every little bit helps in a situation like this, they reasoned. The men pinned their hopes on the few ounces of pee that they carried in their bladders. You should know by now that this was not enough, because we haven't even gotten to the underwear part yet. With literally nothing left, no telescopes, no bread, no packages, and no pee, the men gulped one last gulp, felt the mist of the now frighteningly close water, and they took off their clothes. Fancy shoes, velvet jackets, linen shirts, and expensive trousers joined all of the other lost loot in the lapping waves. Two scared men in their underwear were all that remained. It certainly seemed like the end was near for John Jeffries and Jean-Pierre Blanchard, and the only relief came from the fact that no one would be around to watch them die in their underwear. Then a miracle happened. Like a gift from the heavens or a goddess satisfied with the offerings and sacrifices that they had tossed into the sea, a merciful breeze began to blow. The men filled their lungs with their first breath of hope since the ordeal began, and the wind lifted the balloon steadily above the threatening waves. Soon, the coastline of France came into view. Relief washed over them as the dry land continued to creep closer and closer. They were finally brought to a stop by a tree where they dangled until help arrived. The joy and gratitude of such a harrowing ordeal far outweighed the embarrassment they felt when a crowd of French townsfolk came to investigate the strange purple globe. As surprising as that might have been, perhaps more surprising were the two empty-handed, undressed men dangling in the basket. They actually hadn't thrown everything out. There was one small piece of mail addressed to beggars in Paris at the time. Jeffries decided to hide that in his underwear, rather than throw it out with the rest of the mail that they had purged. So, it was the first air mail, but we could call it the first underwear mail. Clumsy pun, I gotta fix that. Either way, Franklin probably appreciated the effort, and maybe wished that Jeffries would have just held it in his hand. The men would live to fly again. Jean-Pierre actually had a long career of ballooning, at least until his mid-air heart attack ended his life in 1809. After he came crashing back down to Earth, his wife Sophie took over the family business of aeronautics. So that's the end of that chapter, and if you haven't listened to the most recent episode of The Past and the Curious, you can learn about Sophie's story, because she's the first story of the next episode, the episode that just posted on Wednesday. I thank you all so much. I'm really glad. It looks like the fanny pack was a big hit. Fanny pack with lead. I'm really spending the evening with me. Hope you have wonderful day. Happy Meat Shower Day to everyone out there. My name is Mick Sullivan from The Past and the Curious. Send me a message sometime. Let me know you're out there. Hope to talk to you soon, and look for a new episode in March. Thank you very much. Bye. Happy Meat Shower Day.